On today's Locked On Royals podcast, we're going to dive into the MLB trade deadline as a whole, how these top moves around baseball impacted Kansas City and where they want to be in a couple of years. Plus, one of the biggest arguments regarding the CBA was competitive balance and wanting more teams to try to win. Did their plan work after one trade deadline? Find out on today's Locked On Royals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Royals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your teams every day. I am your host, writer at justbaseballmedia.com. Thanks for tuning in to Locked On Royals. And thank you for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, live and available wherever else you get your podcasts from, including on YouTube. Big week on the network. I'll say it again. We did a great job covering the MLB trade deadline. My colleagues at Locked On MLB, the national show, Locked On MLB prospects, and of course, your team podcasts like Locked On Yankees getting Benintendi, and you had Locked On Padres getting everyone in baseball, Josh Bell, Hader, Soto, everyone you can imagine over there in San Diego. You had Locked On Blue Jays covering getting Merrifield. Everything you want trade deadline-wise, you got the Locked On MLB side of things. Also, football, Hall of Fame game happened, training camps in full swing, Locked On Chiefs back to 5 days a week, and they are cooking, getting you set for another long season in Kansas City, hopefully a long playoff run in Kansas City again. So check that out as well. Of course, still have basketball, hockey, NFL, college sports also. So anything you want, we got, but just a few shout-outs for the network right there. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this year with more odds, props, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. I want to, of course, dive into the MLB trade deadline. And there are a few different angles to this. Number one for me is just how these teams shifting, how these teams, how these teams shifting at the deadline and preparing themselves for the future, whether that be going all in and trying for 3 straight pennant chases with Juan Soto on your team if you're San Diego, or if you are trying to recoup your farm system and load up for the future if you're Washington, and everything in between. How does that impact Kansas City, and how does that impact the rest of this year for baseball? That's number one. I also want to take a look at, to start the show, the CBA, the conversation around it, and midway through the first real season with it, has it been working? Now, we haven't gotten to the offseason. We haven't gotten to the free agency. We haven't gotten to all that fun stuff. But one of the big reasons why MLB and MLBPA decided in the CBA to expand the playoffs was because it gives more teams a shot. It makes more teams interesting down the stretch. It makes fan bases more interesting because most fan bases are not buried early in the year, although that still happened for plenty of us, including Kansas City. And the idea was it would make teams more willing to buy at the deadline. It would make teams more willing to push all in. It would make teams more aggressive at the deadline because they're in the playoffs. And I understand the thought process. And I was one of those people who beat that drum because you see it in basketball all the time. Take, for example, the Sacramento Kings. They haven't made the playoffs in 20 years. They're trying their hardest not to win an NBA Finals, not to win the Western Conference. They're trying their hardest to make the play-in tournament. They're trying their hardest to be a top 10 seed in the West. That's their goal. Their goal is not a finals appearance. Their goal is not a Western Conference Finals. Their goal is not a first-round series win. It's to be a top 10 seed. Now, of course, that's going too far for the taste of the traditionalists in baseball. But adding the additional playing game, playoff game, the additional wildcard spot, we thought that would lend itself to more teams trying to compete and more teams trying to go all in at the deadline. Because, as we talked about, baseball's fluky. You just have to get into the dance. Baseball and hockey are the two sports that are like this, where once you're in, anything can happen. You can have the 3 best starts of your life as a pitching staff and get you to the next round, and then from there, everything falls into place. You could be the best team in baseball, and for whatever reason, for those 7 games, your team just cannot hit a lick. You can have the ball carry them off the bag. You can have the ball eat up a Gold Glove shortstop. You can have a first baseman who can't throw home. You can have so many things go in or out of your favor that it's just a crapshoot. And so the idea behind adding the additional playoff spot was that, well, if it's such a crapshoot and technically anyone can win World Series at any time, more teams would go for it. More teams would be willing to try to push all in for it. But I look around, and the Blue Jays added Whit Merrifield. The Mariners made some moves where they got Carlos Santana early, and they made some flyer pickups like that. But they did go in for the Reds ace, so I give them credit there. Tampa Bay didn't make a move. Baltimore's 2 games out. They sold Trey Mancini. Cleveland's 2 games out. They didn't do anything. The White Sox, who were lofted as the best team in the Central in the preseason, did not do a single thing. They're 3 games out. If they made a move that could really push them in, they could have gotten hot at the right time. That's a prime example of a team that can get hot at the right time. They're struggling all year long. They get healthy. They get better. They add at the deadline, and then they could have made a magical run. And now they're not in the playoffs, and they're not any better for it post-deadline. There's no other way to improve your team besides just getting healthy. Boston's 4 games out. They sold off Vasquez. They sold off pieces and brought back Eric Hosmer, who is a net negative point in time. And then from there, Texas isn't in it. The Angels aren't in it. The Royals are not in it. The Tigers are not in it. The A's are not in it. But you look at the NL side of things. You saw Philadelphia take a flyer on Syndergaard. You saw St. Louis not really do much. Nothing from the Giants, and I can't really blame them. They're 6.5 out. But here's who's kind of logged at the wild card spot. One of the Brewers or Cardinals, because they're tied right now in the division. Someone's going to be a division winner. Someone's going to be a wild card team. The Phillies, the Padres, and the Braves. Braves added a little bit. Padres went all in. Brewers sold off their best reliever, and then, just made an interesting move there. And I get it, right? They are not going to win a World Series in all likelihood, but the argument to that is, hey, you get in the dance, anything can happen, and they still can win their division. And like I said, the Phillies went out and bought on Syndergaard. The point of this being, I don't think it's panned out yet the way we thought it would. Is that trend going to continue? Let's talk about it coming up. But first, I want to tell you right now, my good friends over at BlueNile.com. Well, BlueNile.com is where you want to be, whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment. Find jewelry as unique as they are with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, clarity, and setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind for they're just perfect engagement rings. Look for fine jewelry. And if you have trouble, Blue Nile even offers jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or to chat or to help you find that memorable gift at every budget. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com and go right now to the Blue Nile anniversary sale. Save up to 40% on classic fine jewelry pieces and 25% on engagement rings, settings. Plus, every order is insured, ships for free, and arrives in a discreet package that won't give away what's inside. So shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. We are back on the Locked On Royals podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Royals your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you talking Royals baseball. Appreciate you listening. Appreciate you checking out the show. We've talked Benintendi trade. We've talked with Merrifield trade. We've talked the Luke Weaver swap with Kansas City and the Diamondbacks with our good friend Miller Thomas of Locked On Diamondbacks. You can go back and listen to that. The crossover that we had earlier this week. You can listen to all of that and have a good time. Also, of course, check out Locked On MLB and Locked On MLB Prospects. And one other shout out quickly for the Kansas City Chiefs and Locked On Chiefs getting their season started off in training camp. So we got you covered there as well. So again, the CBA is supposed to implement more competitive balance and supposed to make teams feel like they're more in it, and it just didn't happen, at least not at this first ever deadline after the CBA. And this is a trend that I think will continue. And the reason I think it will continue is because baseball is too smart for its own good in the sense of, the Kings haven't made the playoffs in 20 years. They just want to make the playoffs. They just want to go to the play-in tournament. Whereas a baseball organization, they have so many just in-depth, rational, robotic members of their front office to where what's the difference in going 22 years but putting yourself in position to win a World Series than making the playoffs this year, being short-sighted, and then you have another 15-year drought whenever you can't win the World Series anyway. Now, for the Royals, they pushed in 2015. They traded a whole pitching staff away, which none of them except Sean and I really panned out, obviously. But they traded a whole pitching staff away, and they get back Cueto, they get back Ben Zobrist, but they won a World Series. And so, yeah, they haven't made the playoffs in 7 years, but still, they won a World Series. And so baseball is too smart for its own good in the sense of the Brewers, they understand, hey, we're not a World Series team. Sure, you can make up these dream hypotheticals in your head. Sure, you can make up these fairy tale endings of each game in your head. But if we roll the balls out there 9 times out of 10, we are not a World Series caliber team. We're probably not even a get out of the wild card caliber team. We are just not good. They can see the forest of the trees. Whereas in other sports, the front office has just enough crazy fan-like people to where, hey, we're in the playoffs, anything can happen. They have too many blissfully ignorant optimists, right? Everyone should be optimistic. Everybody should feel good about the team that they've constructed. But at the end of the day, baseball just has more robotic people in it. And that's just the way baseball is. And I think that that's why we haven't seen any all-in moves from Minnesota, right? Like, sure, we're going to win the AL Central if you're Minnesota, but, let's mind our P's and Q's here and just get better in the margins and try to hold on to the Central Division and see what happens. Because in all honesty, they can't beat Houston. They can't beat New York if things are trending the way they trend right now. If you're Toronto, sure, you're going to take a flyer on Whit Merrifield because if you spark his career back around, that's a really nice utility piece to have. But let's not trade away our top 10 prospects for an all-in guy for a team that's just not there yet. Baseball teams typically do a good job of not rushing things. Whereas other sports, they get one little ounce of success, they put themselves in position for the playoffs, and they just go all in immediately and think it's their time, whenever it's just not. It's just not. And look, it's not always the big fancy Juan Soto trades that win you World Series. Look at Jorge Soler last year. Royals fans were ecstatic to get rid of him. They were happy to finally have him out of the lineup every single day, to finally have him traded. And then he goes on to Atlanta, and he is a World Series champion, World Series MVP, and he's just dominant for Atlanta, and he's the reason why they have a World Series trophy from last year right now. And he got paid again, going to Miami. So in baseball, those moves on the margins still matter, but they don't attract the headlines. Make no mistake, though. Last night's deadline was great for baseball. It got people talking. It got people excited. about the sport. We see Juan Soto in his new uniform, Josh Bell in his new uniform. Those moves get people going. But the amount of teams who are willing to make those kind of moves were smaller than what many anticipated after the new CBA. And for the Royals, as your post-deadline recap after we talked about Whit Merrifield yesterday, for the Royals, they held on to their bullpen guys, Scott Barlow. They held on to Josh Staumont, obviously. They held on to Michael A. Taylor as well. So you're hoping that Michael A. Taylor can continue this good trend at the plate and continue playing late-level defense next year, and then you can trade him next year as a one-year rental or a half-year rental. I don't begrudge them for not trading Barlow or Staumont. If they would have done it again, I would not have complained. But I do like them holding those two guys, and then I was excited for the future of the Royals with all these young guys that they got coming up. You had, of course, Bobby Witt Jr. back in the lineup after being hurt a little bit last week. Obviously, he had the go-ahead hit tonight. Like you have some positive things right now. Ultimately, the deadline was a success for Kansas City. I think it was a success for baseball. It was better than what even I expected it to be. It would have been awesome to see Shohei Ohtani moved with Juan Soto in the sense of like having both premier players move. That would have been just electric. And I do think, as me and Millard said on a podcast earlier this week, baseball is the king in this area over every other sport. Baseball is the sport that gets kicked down the most in terms of American sports. The core four of NFL, NHL, NBA, MLB. Baseball is the one that gets dogged the most, but in this area, baseball is dominant. No one does a trade deadline like the MLB. I've got to plead ignorance on the NHL, obviously, but in terms of NBA and NFL, nobody does trade deadline like MLB. And it proved it once again with the Juan Soto move. Now, is this trend of giving up 4 of your top 10 prospects or 4 of your top 11 prospects going to continue? And if it does, where does that land Kansas City? We'll talk about that coming up. But first, I want to tell you right now, but good friends over at BetOnline, folks. BetOnline is amazing. It's where you want to be for the best odds, news, and scores. Make sure you check them out today for MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline is your continued top spot for sports wagering, live betting, scores, podcasts, and news. They have you covered. Go right now to BetOnline today, and you will use your mobile device or your laptop and check them out today. BetOnline, where the game starts. It's so easy. Type in betonline.net. Pops you over to their website. Go to sports, and then bada bing, bada boom. After you click on sports, it'll load you right up to the MLB side of things. You can scroll down, find the Royals. 1.5-point underdogs at home with Zach Greinke on the bump against Boston. Go check that out and place your bets today at BetOnline, where the game starts. We are back on the Locked On Royals podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Royals. Email the show, lockedonroyals@gmail.com. I want to end the show by talking about the Juan Soto trade. The Padres gave up 4 of their 11 top prospects. Of their top 11 prospects, they gave up 4 of them. How does that impact Kansas City whenever they want to win again? The price of this stuff only goes up. Would Kansas City ever be able to afford to go all in a trade? If the cost of doing business for Kansas City is 4 of your top 11 prospects, can the Royals afford to do that whenever they get good again? Because the Royals can't go out and improve their team via free agency. They can improve it on the margins, but they cannot go out and get a Juan Soto in free agency. They cannot go out and get a Garrett Cole in free agency like the Yankees did. They cannot go out and get one of these premier guys, a Freddie Freeman. They just can't. Their big signs that they get applauded for is Carlos Santana. It's Michael A. Taylor. That's the kind of guy that the Royals can go get in free agency. So it's a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, The odds of all 4 panning out are slim to none. You hope you pick the right 4 that don't all pan out in your top 11. You give them all away for a proven commodity. And even if 2 of them pan out, what are the odds that they're better than Juan Soto is? Juan Soto is a top 10 player in baseball. What are the odds that one of those 4 or 2 of those 4 combined even are that of the value of a top 5 player in baseball? Not very high. But for the Royals, whenever that's your only shot to improve, can you afford to push all those chips in? Can you afford to do a 4-for-1 trade? To me, the price is undetermined. It is to be determined, right? Because it just depends on the style of the team. For example, 2015, when the Royals won just by not luck, but they won on the back of playing the game the old-fashioned way of defense and running and playing the game properly and not fishing for home runs, not fishing for striking, playing the contact, all that kind of stuff. No, I would not go all in for that team to add a superstar. If my team was just a bunch of boppers, I'd add another one, right? It just depends on what your team needs at that point. But it'd be a hard sell in Kansas City, and that's where now they find themselves with 2 market inefficiencies that go against them. Because they can't go out and spend big money on big free agents. They can't go out and now trade for guys like Juan Soto because you trade away 4 top 11 prospects in Kansas City, there's no way to regroup from that. There's just no way to regroup from that if you're Kansas City and your team that has to build through the draft and build through your farm system. Now, I will say, it's important to note, even in Kansas City's situation, if you do that for a guy like Juan Soto, who's not only top 10, but has 3 playoff chases in him, you obviously only do that at the deadline whenever you're in it. So you got the first one, we initially trade for him, the next year and the next year of control. If that's your scenario, if you're Kansas City, then yeah, you can do that because on that final year before he gets to free agency and before you can't re-sign him, you can then flip him again and recoup some of those prospects. So it just would depend on the right scenario falling. But again, it's tough. It's tough for Kansas City and a team like a small market to part with those prospects because that's your only form of currency. That's your only form of getting better. So let me know what you think about the Juan Soto trade down below. And until tomorrow, be good and be good to one another.